He was just 13, sitting quietly in his first-class seat, enjoying the flight. Then she appeared, her eyes sharp with judgment, her lips twisting in contempt. To her, he didn't belong there. Black, young, too poor, she assumed. She pointed, she shouted, acting like she owned the sky. But she had no idea whose son he really was. In that moment, arrogance met power, and the consequences were about to explode in ways she could never imagine. What happens when prejudice meets the wrong family? It was an early morning, and 13-year-old Marcus was excited for the flight. The cabin lights glowed softly as he buckled into his first-class seat, a small backpack tucked at his feet. To anyone else, he was just a boy traveling alone, polite, quiet, unassuming. Marcus had grown up learning to observe, to listen, to stay calm in uncomfortable situations. His father, a successful CEO and a major investor in the airline, had always taught him that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it waited, quietly until the right moment. As the flight attendants began their routine, one woman's gaze landed on Marcus. Her eyes narrowed, lips pressing into a tight line, and a flicker of contempt passed across her face. Something about him, she decided, didn't belong in first class. She had no idea that this seemingly ordinary morning was about to ignite a storm she could never have predicted. Marcus sat quietly in his first-class seat, adjusting his tray as the flight attendants moved down the aisle. The hum of the engines and the soft chatter of passengers created a false sense of calm, one that shattered the moment she reached him. The woman's eyes flared with irritation the instant she looked at him. Her lips curled, sharp and judgmental, as though his presence alone was a personal insult. Without warning, she leaned down, pointing at his seat with an accusatory finger. "This isn't your place," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Marcus felt a flicker of fear but didn't move. He had been trained to stay calm, to observe, to measure his reactions. But her tone made the air heavy, suffocating, charged with contempt. Around him, other passengers glanced up, curiosity and discomfort mingling in their eyes. She gestured for him to follow her, her body rigid with authority. "Come with me," she commanded, as though she were the judge of the cabin and he had already been declared guilty. Marcus stood slowly, keeping his expression neutral, walking beside her while the murmurs of other passengers grew louder. Every step felt like a challenge, every glance from the woman an accusation. In that moment, Marcus knew she didn't see him as a child, or even as a passenger. To her, he was an intruder, a boy who didn't belong, someone to be humiliated to enforce her own sense of superiority. And yet he remained composed, unshaken, knowing that appearances could be deceiving. She had no idea that the boy she was belittling was the son of a man who had the power to shake her world. Her frustration mounted with every word, every gesture. She barked orders, demanded explanations, her face reddening as she tried to assert dominance over someone she assumed was beneath her. But Marcus's calmness was a quiet rebellion, a silent refusal to give her the satisfaction she craved. She began to lose control, her professionalism cracking under the weight of her own prejudice. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension, watching the clash of authority and innocence unfold. The woman's fury was palpable, a storm that seemed unstoppable, but in the quiet confidence of Marcus's gaze there was a hint of inevitability. Something was about to break, and she couldn't see it coming. As the confrontation reached its peak, the woman made a decision, one that would set the stage for consequences far beyond the cabin. She was about to humiliate him publicly, unaware that in the shadows power waited silently, ready to turn the tables she would never forget. The cabin felt smaller now, charged with every ounce of the woman's fury. She was relentless, her words sharp, her gestures domineering, convinced that humiliation would force Marcus out of first class. But he remained still, composed, every movement measured, every glance calm. Around them, the other passengers watched, uneasy, sensing the collision of arrogance and hidden power. And then came the moment that changed everything. Marcus's father, alerted to the incident by a quick call from the airline's corporate office, appeared in the background of the story, not in the cabin, but in the boardrooms and balance sheets where real authority lived. What the flight attendant didn't know What no one on the plane could see was that this boy's bloodline carried influence strong enough to topple careers and destabilize companies. Within hours, she would find her arrogance met with an unyielding force. The email arrived, her employment terminated. But that was just the beginning. Marcus's father pulled his investments from the airline, quietly, without fanfare, without media frenzy, yet with consequences that hit like a storm. Stocks plummeted. The company's leadership scrambled, reputation shattered, and the woman, who had thought herself untouchable in the air, felt the weight of the world closing in on her. For her, the humiliation she had tried to inflict on a 13-year-old boy became her own undoing. Power, she realized too late, was not in authority over strangers. It was in influence, foresight, and patience. And Marcus? He had sat through it all, calm, unshaken, knowing that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it strikes quietly, swiftly, and irrevocably. The plane landed, and life returned to its usual rhythm for most passengers. But the echo of what had happened lingered. Marcus stepped off the aircraft, calm and composed, carrying none of the fear or anger that had defined the encounter. He had witnessed prejudice firsthand, felt its sting, and yet had remained unbroken. The woman who had tried to humiliate him would never forget the consequences, but Marcus, and the quiet power of justice, had moved on. The airline reeled quietly behind the scenes. Stock prices fell, leadership scrambled, and reputations cracked under the weight of decisions made in arrogance. All because one person assumed a child's appearance defined his worth. Marcus's story was a reminder that assumptions, prejudice, and hatred can blind us to reality, and that those who wield power with cruelty can be undone by forces they never see. But beyond the corporate fallout, the lesson runs deeper. This wasn't just about a boy or a flight attendant. It was about the countless moments every day when judgment and discrimination go unchecked, leaving invisible scars. It was about the courage to stay calm, to let truth and integrity speak louder than anger. It was about the quiet, undeniable power of justice when wielded wisely. In the end, Marcus continued his life, 13 and still growing, carrying with him a lesson most adults never learn, that prejudice may roar, but justice, when applied patiently and strategically, can strike silently and decisively. And the question lingers, how often do we let assumptions dictate our actions, and what price might we pay when we do?